The screen went black, not a polite blink, but the kind of blackout that swallows a room whole. $1 billion deal started dying in front of me, and I wasn't even supposed to be there. If it were you, what would you have done? I was the girl by the door, in a public school uniform, braid pulled a little too tight, notebook under my arm like a shield. 25th floor, glass everywhere. Mexico City glowing under our feet, like somebody poured stars on Paseo de la Reforma. And in that boardroom, the air felt expensive, like every breath had to be billed. Investors in dark suits checked their watches in sync, translators whispered in French, and at the head of the table sat Alonso Monteverde navy suit silk tie, the kind of posture money buys when it forgets where it started. Someone murmured, "The system is down," and a nervous laugh slipped across the table like a crack in ice. The technician had stepped out on an urgent call, the screen froze on a black that looked personal, and just like that, the contract that was supposed to crown Alonso's career dangled by a thread you couldn't even see. The legal chief Bassan warned everyone not to touch a thing. The executive assistant Lucia smirked, like this was cute, and the investors stood halfway out of their chairs, the way a tide inches back, before it decides what it's going to do next. Do you think that's fair to judge a man's life's work by a screen that won't wake up? My name is Valeria. I'm 19, daughter of the janitor in this building. I grew up in these hallways without an access badge, spending afternoons in a basement where old computers went to rust, learning how to coax life out of machines with more personality than manners. Invisible doesn't mean powerless. You know what I mean. I heard my own voice before I decided to use it. Mr. Monteverde. I can try. Heads snapped like I'd pulled a fire alarm. Lucia rolled her eyes. Bassan warned about corrupting files like I was a hurricane with sneakers, and Alonso didn't sneer or smile. He weighed me, then tapped the clock on the wall. 5 minutes. Tick, tick. I walked to the rack, warm dust in my throat. Tiny LEDs blinking like anxious fireflies. The video hub was hung a dongle light stuck solid when it should have been blinking protocol handshake asleep on its feet. I pulled a thin AUX cable from my backpack, like a rabbit out of a hat, tunneled past the automation, pressed a clean reboot on the hub, and listened to the fans find their courage. Nothing, then almost something, then nothing again. Not just the display, I said, sliding to the laptop. There's a process strangling video decode. I popped open Task Manager, and there it was, scanful 33h.exe, chewing CPU like it thought it owned the place. Give me permission to pause this for 3 minutes. I told Alonso if it's legit, it'll respawn on its own. He glanced at the investors drifting toward the door, then nodded. Pause. The fan sighed. Duplicate display, handshake, gray, a rectangle, blue, and finally, the Monteverde logo, bright and clean, like a flag someone thought they'd never see again. And then I saw it, a little red line in a scheduler that didn't belong to this room. Video output. Off. 11:30. The wall clock said 11:27. Pattern interrupt. 3 minutes left. If you were me, do you tell the room or fix it in silence? There's a kill switch at 11:30. I said loud enough to pierce the suit armor without admin. I can't kill the task plan. B is to keep a physical AUX alive, even if the main feed dies. I slid a razor-thin HDMI into the panel, forced the display to AUX, locked it in. At 11:30, the main output flickered and died like a staged fainting. The AUX stayed standing. You could feel the whole room exhale like a crowd that just watched a tightrope walker step off the wire onto a roof. Yeah, that happened. We didn't have the original PowerPoint because the technician guarded backups like a dragon. so I ran a clean viewer from my USB, nothing invasive, and opened a cached PDF the laptop had tucked away while life still made sense. The slides appeared expansion maps to Monterrey and Guadalajara charts, with lines that climbed like they had somewhere to be, and the French investors sat back down, not happy, but hunting for reasons to keep listening. Alonso leaned near me and whispered, "Stay close," and for a second, I saw the man he was before the money turned armor into skin. The Q+A came like rain, French, English, Spanish acronyms bouncing off glass, and then a pop in the corner of the screen, small but sharp. Calendar reminder. Private meeting. Room B at noon. Commission adjustments. Addressed to Lucia, blind copy unknown. The kind of message that makes the floor tilt. Lucia went pale. Alonso smiled at the room like nothing happened and landed the last answers clean. Then, as the door shut behind the investors, that smile slipped like a mask at midnight. He told Lucia and Bassan to stay, told me to stay, and suddenly the table felt like a courtroom. "Explain," he said to Lucia, voice flat and sharp. Her hands shook, then confessions started falling out. Little ones at first, then bigger. How she'd shared temporary admin to install patches, how there was a side deal, how invisibility makes people do strange things for the chance to be seen. Alonso hit the table with an open hand that sounded like an oath, and I said what my dad taught me to say when rooms get loud. "We'll fix nothing by yelling. Cut the backup server from the network. Read the logs, follow the timestamps. Stop guessing." The server room breathed like a machine. Light blinked, steady fans hummed a chorus, metal warmed the air. I popped a panel, ran the logs, scrolled through the garden of numbers and names until footprints appeared like wet shoes on tile. There it was, admin access minutes before the crash. Landa Sergio, the temp support lead with a chip on his shoulder and a smile that never reached his eyes. But something else glowed cold in the back of the log, a ghost entry from years ago. Regomez. Authorized. 15 years back. My father's name baked into the bones of the system. My chest went tight. I asked Alonso if he knew my dad beyond a mop and a ring of keys, and the look that climbed onto his face told a whole history in one breath. He said my father had been his right hand back when Monteverde was more plan than empire. A self-taught mind who wired the early controls, secured. The early presentations, kept the lights on when the building didn't know it was going to be a building. No title, no photo, no shares. Officially. Then came a foreign contract that demanded efficiency, which is what people say when they mean cut human beings you never learned to look in the eye. Alonso took the deal. My father walked out. Years later, he came back with a gray jumpsuit and dignity you can't fake on one condition. He would clean the building, not serve the brand. If it were you, could you forgive that? Or would you turn invisible on purpose like a protest nobody reads? My phone buzzed like destiny clearing its throat. "I'm outside," my dad texted. "I need to say something before someone else does." He came in with dust on his sleeves and years in his eyes. He didn't deny the old access, he confirmed it, and he denied sabotage with a quiet that made even the fans listen. The legal chief started talking about email spoofs. Lucia cried about being overlooked. Alonso looked like a man who just watched his young self in a mirror he didn't know was still hanging, and me. I looked at a path that cut through pride, shame, and money, and I knew where my feet had to go. I spun up a honeypot, a decoy screen, that looked dead, while a recorder sat behind the glass, like a hunter breathing slow. "Stick around, because what happened next will blow your mind," I whispered. "Half to you, half to the girl I used to be." The alert flashed red like a siren. Unauthorized connection. Local IP. Floor 14. Secondary conference room. We moved fast, security in front, me and my dad behind the hallways, smelling like carpet and decisions. We pushed the door, and there he was, Sergio Landa, laptop open, smirk, locked in, ready to monologue. Alonso wanted a name, a price, a puppet master, and Landa shook his head like revenge was charity he gave himself. He pulled a USB from his pocket like a trophy and said he had proof that the empire stood on work. Alonso never credited proof my father had written the early systems that made them rich. Proof the world would eat like sugar. He looked right at me when he said it, because he thought I'd choose anger over truth, because he thought daughters are weapons you can point and fire. You know what I mean? Some people mistake love for a fuse. Here's the twist that flips the story inside out. My father didn't lie to me. He did write the first lines, he did keep the early pulse alive. He did make the kind of choices that leave fingerprints on systems years later. Alonso didn't lie either when he said ambition made him cruel. Both truths sat in the room at the same time, and Landa tried to use them like gasoline. If it were you, would you open that USB in a back office and bargain, or would you show it to everyone and trust whatever happened next? We walked back to this big room and asked the investors to sit again. Some looked ready to leave, others smelled a story, and Landa strutted like a man who thinks he's the narrator. He slid the USB in like a key only he knew how to turn, and for 2 seconds he lived in the world he'd planned. Then the screen filled with windows he didn't recognize. Not old contracts, not blurred screenshots of code, not emails with names blacked out. Screen recordings of his own tampering task scheduler entries with his user tag calendar manipulations, remote sessions that started when he told everyone he'd stepped out. He reached to rip the USB out, but security already had his elbows, and the lead investor pounded the table, voice cold as a bank vault. Sabotage is not a business plan. The room landed on its feet. Alonso looked at me like a man who finally finds a door after running the same hallway for years. The investors recalculated out loud, risk fell, trust rose, and the deal didn't just survive, it steadied. Lucia kept her job that day, but not her access. The legal chief started writing statements, and I learned something about how quickly a crowd can switch from doubt to applause when the truth is big enough to see from the cheap seats. Later, cameras flashed headlines, did what headlines do, and strangers called me the janitor's kid who saved a billionaire. Cute line, wrong center. This wasn't about saving an empire, it was about who gets to write the footnotes under it. In front of the people who never learned my dad's name, Alonso said the words that should have existed years ago. He credited my father as co-architect of the early systems publicly, and on paper not as charity but as correction. He offered me a scholarship here or abroad to study engineering without having to sneak lessons from broken machines in a basement. I didn't want pity, I wanted a door, and a door finally opened. Do you think that's fair? To clean the floors of a building you helped build from the inside, then be told it's generous when somebody remembers. That night in our small apartment in Iztapalapa, my dad made coffee and leaned on the counter, like men lean when a long day finally stops pushing back. Do you think it was worth it? I asked, because even victories come with receipts. He nodded slow, the way a weight shifts 1 inch, but suddenly everything breathes. Money can't fix what pride broke, he said. But truth can start the repair, and sometimes the start is more than half. You know what I mean? The week that followed was messy in the way real life refuses to be edited. HR meetings, PR drafts, lawyers deciding how to say we were wrong without inviting a lawsuit, me getting messages from kids who said they felt seen, and messages from people who told me to be grateful and quiet. Yeah, that happened. My answer was the same to both. Choosing truth over silence isn't about being a hero, It's about refusing to be the task someone scheduled to shut off at 11:30. It's about finding the AUX when they own the switch. Here's the part that might start a fight in the comments. Good, let it. We love giving second chances to powerful people who already have parachutes. We adore what redemption arcs when the lighting is flattering. But we almost never talk about the quiet debt owed to the ghost builders. The ones whose names aren't on the wall, the ones who taught a system how to breathe, then got handed a mop. What does justice look like for them? Back pay ownership. Public credit scholarships that don't expire, seats at tables where decisions are actually made. Or do we settle for a press release and a handshake because that's cheaper, and the next crisis is already trending? If it were you, what would you have done differently at that table? When the screen went dark, when the timer was ticking, when a USB promised fire, when the truth asked you to choose it in public. Do you think companies should compensate the people who built their early foundations with more than words, or is recognition enough if you're late but sincere? Tell me where you stand, even if we argue a little. We can handle it. And if you're the person by the door right now, braid too tight, heart too loud, being told you're invisible while the room pretends it can't hear you, take a breath. Find the cable route around the switch. The kill command isn't the end if you refuse to follow their schedule for your courage. If this story hit where you keep your backbone, subscribe, share it with somebody who needs to hear they're not alone, and drop your take below. Agreement. Disagreement. Your own moment when the screen went black and you spoke anyway. If it were you, what would you have done? And what do you think is fair? Your voice matters here, and I'll be in the comments listening.